welcome to ayearofhitchcockmovies.com. We are your hosts, Jeff and Diane, and this is movie number 25 from 1944, two short films, Bon Voyage and AVENTURE Malgache. Both made in 1944. After making Lifeboat in 1944, Alfred Hitchcock requested a leave of absence. He wanted to go to England and make a couple of war propaganda films for the Ministry of Information. He wanted to go to England to do his bit. He knew he was old and overweight and couldn't really go back and pick up a weapon, but as a movie maker he already has done a lot and really felt at this moment it would be best if he could actually go to England and make a couple of propaganda films. And he must have really wanted to go, because you can imagine David L. Selznick wanted no part of that, having his cash cow Alfred Hitchcock go off into harm's way to be in London, which was being bombarded and that sort of thing. But Hitchcock really did want to go, and he got his way, and he was allowed to go. So he makes these films for the Ministry of Information. And you know, I read a little bit about that. The Ministry of Information was created in England just a few days after World War II started, and it was disbanded just a few days after World War II was completed, the Japan side of it anyways, in 1946. And it really is one of these organizations that, you know, the job, they had two main purposes. One was to censor the news, and the other was to disseminate information through posters or through radio broadcasts or films like the ones we're going to see tonight, to basically just make sure that the war effort was good and everything was on the up and up. But notice I said censor the news. That really was their big job. A lot of the things they did were very clandestine and secretive and behind the scenes, which isn't to say that this was secretive, but it's just an interesting moment in British wartime history. So basically he goes over to England to make these two films to support the French resistance movement and the Allied war effort. There was a French acting troupe in London called the Molière Players, and he directs them in both of these films. The films are in French. They're with English subtitles because they were to be released to the French people to inspire the people to resist the Nazi occupation that ultimately did last 4 years. And it's worth remembering that the stakes were really high. You know, the French people at this point were under very strict rules and curfews and restrictions, and going against the rules imposed by their occupiers meant arrest, imprisonment, and possibly death. So the actors in these films, you know, in the opening credits, you don't even see their names. It just says the Molière Players, for fear that their family members could be put in harm's way, you know, by the Nazi government in charge in France at the time. So, and I do want to point out that if you are watching this and are about to watch these two films, you truly are a hardcore Hitchcock fan, or you're just really interested in watching them all in order, because very few people have seen these movies. Very few Hitchcock fans even know of these movies, and one of the reasons is that in 1944, once they were finished, they were never released. They were never actually released to the general public. In fact, they were locked up and didn't actually see the light of day until 1993. They were actually deemed to be too inflammatory. Now, they're not inflammatory today, so you might wonder what all the fuss is about once you see them, but you know, the time, this was going on at the time. And, you know, you have this whole Vichy French thing, the Vichy government. It's definitely worthwhile reading up on Wikipedia. I know I did, again, just to remind myself about these things. But ultimately it was the government that was put in place by the Germans to rule occupied France. And it was a totalitarian state. And you know, you had these French guys that were like, yes, I've always wanted to run France with the totalitarian state, and we're gonna do this and round up some Jews and put people in jail and you know, a very, very scary time. And so, you know, you had some choices as an individual. Do you resist this occupation, which is very risky, or do you go along and just survive, which is less risky? And if you're just a regular person, it's, you know, what do you do? What do you choose? It's complicated. It was complicated then. It's complicated now. But those that did, form this Vichy government, ultimately when dust settled and the Allies liberated France, they were tried and they were sentenced to life imprisonment and death, and it was just a real messy scene, and it's still a touchy subject, Vichy France. So quick synopsis on these on these films. The first one we'll watch, Bon Voyage, is 25 minutes long. It just tells a story. We've got a young Scottish pilot. He's an RAF pilot, and he was shot down behind enemy lines in France. And basically, with the help of the resistance, he is able to escape and get back to England, presumably where they're going to put him back in a plane and have him go fight again. And this French officer who's in London interrogates him, wants to know how he made it back. He wants all the details, and so we're told this story twice in a series of flashbacks. So that's Bon Voyage. The second movie, AVENTURE Malgache, is 31 minutes long, also very short. We've got three actors that are sitting in this dressing room, and they're putting on makeup and they're getting their costumes on. They're all facing apart, and the guy on the left, he's telling them about his adventures in Madagascar, with the French word for Madagascar being Malgache. Madagascar was a French colony. So basically, he's telling the stories. I guess he was a trial lawyer in Madagascar in 1940, living there. He's back in England as an actor, kind of like the actors in these two films, in England acting in French plays. But he's telling the story of when he was this trial lawyer in Madagascar, when suddenly Germany is occupying France and making all these rules, what it was like being in a faraway colony, and how he resisted them and was his own resistance, and fought the Nazis and fought all these people, and fought the people who were collaborating with the Germans, and the story of the resistance people who resisted them and risked their lives and fought back. So basically, his name is Claire Rouge. This is actually based on a real life story of a person whose name escapes me. So interesting. That's the story. So it's also told in flashback. So you're either in this dressing room with these three guys, and one guy's telling the story, or you're in Madagascar, and it goes back and forth. So you gotta sort of pay attention. So there you go. Now there are no cameos to look for, because that probably would have been inappropriate for these propaganda films. But one thing interesting, both of these movies, these films, were written, at least in part, by a fellow by the name of Angus MacPhail. Now, Angus MacPhail is important to us Hitchcock types because, well, he was a British screenwriter, and he worked for British Gaumont Studios. Remember British Gaumont? Remember all those great films? Man Who Knew Too Much, the original, 39 Steps, Secret Agent, Sabotage, Young and Innocent. There's got to be another couple in there, Lady Vanishes. Well, he worked with them then, so Hitchcock knew him. Hitchcock was good buddies with him. He actually will co-write the screenplay on next week's film, Spellbound, and he will co-write the screenplay in a movie down the road called The Wrong Man, starring Henry Fonda. Angus MacPhail, and according to at least one Alfred Hitchcock biographer, he was the guy who coined the term MacGuffin. With a name like Angus MacPhail, the Scottish story. So there you go. Angus MacPhail wrote both of these films that we watched. So here we go. Let's watch these two propaganda shorts from Alfred Hitchcock from 1944 that were not seen by anyone until 13 or 14 years after his death. So let's watch.